Hello, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Yes, you're back, we're back, and thank you for joining us. We've been doing this, I've checked before we started recording, over a year now. Over a year of Ask Rob and Robs, that's gone quick. I hope you've enjoyed it. We're not planning on stopping anytime soon. It doesn't seem you are either, because lots of questions are coming in. But if you haven't yet, why not take advantage of this free resource? Rob, if someone hasn't asked a question yet, we've been doing this over a year, it's about time they should. What should they do?
Well, they should do one of these two things. Firstly, you could either give us a call, so you can call 013 808 00035 and leave us a voicemail there. Or you can accomplish exactly the same thing. You can leave us a voicemail via your laptop by going to thepropertyhub.net/podcast. That is all you have to do, and that is exactly what Mike did. So let's hear what Mike's question was.
Hey Rob and Rob, Mike here, love the show. I'm wondering, when looking at potential properties, do you have a target net yield you would look for? I'd love to hear what you consider a good yield is, so I can set my expectations. And similar to this, have you ever invested in a property where the net yield is lower than you would have liked? However, by taking advantage of gearing and the current low interest rates, the ROI is actually high enough for you to go for it? Thanks. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Keep up the great work.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. Really good question. Common question as well, and it's a natural one to have. Like, how good is good enough? When you're going through Rightmove, doing those maths, kind of what's an acceptable number for it to spit out at the end? Well, I think, the first thing to say is that it is different for everyone. Everyone's got their own ideas of what they're trying to achieve based on their goals, their risk tolerance, and all manner of other things. So any answers we give, and I think we're going to give slightly different answers from each other, aren't necessarily right or wrong. They're just what we do. And then you can decide what you want to do based on all those different factors that I mentioned. What I will say is that I don't, and I know Rob doesn't either, we don't personally use net yield as a measure. We tend to look at ROI instead. So that takes into account something that Mike mentioned, which is the effect of using a mortgage. If you don't use a mortgage, then ROI and net yield turns out to be the same number. So it's always safe to use ROI, and that's what I like to do, because that means after factoring in the mortgage, that is how hard my cash is actually going to be working. So I like to use ROI as the absolute number that I base everything on. And then we'll occasionally look at gross yield. So that is the income that's produced as a percentage of value before any expenses come off, just as a really quick and dirty measure of comparing different properties that are likely to have similar costs associated with them. So use kind of gross yield for a first filter, and then ROI to really make the decision. What is that magic ROI number? Well, I am a little bit greedy. I like to have an ROI of at least 10%. And I was thinking about it when Mike asked the question, because I don't think I have ever invested in a property that has an ROI lower than that. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It definitely doesn't mean that, because ROI is only looking at the rental return. So if there's the possibility for massive capital growth or potential to add a load of value, then of course there could be a really good reason to buy a property with an ROI or net yield or whatever you look at lower than your target. It's just that I personally haven't. So that's old greedy guts, Rob D. I think, Rob, you're a little bit more relaxed than I am.
Oh, Robert, you greedy guts. Actually, if you asked me a few months ago, I'd have said 10% as well. I think that's a fair number to go for. But having stamp duty in the equation now, I accept 8%. However, I will say a few things. That's for a property where I'm doing zero work. I'm buying it and handing it over to Yellow Lettings and getting it let. I'm not refurbing. I'm not putting any effort in. I'm not spending a penny on it once it's bought. So that is as Rob said at the beginning, it's all relative. You know, if you're doing a refurb project or planning on putting a lot of work in or takes more time to manage, like a HMO, then you would expect to go for a higher ROI. But for a low maintenance, hands-off experience, would have said 10, but now with stamp duty 8. I have gone much higher and much lower than that from an ROI point of view. You know, I've done in excess of 14%. And I've done, I think, less than 6 as well. And that's because I'm focused on this as a number, as a metric to keep an eye on. But it's not the only thing that I will handcuff myself to a deal for. So, for example, I've invested the lower end of the scale in a property in a really, really nice city, Chester, in a really nice area of that city, next to a hospital. So the capital growth prospects are really strong, really good tenant demand, lovely property as well. So for all those reasons, I was more than happy to accept a lower ROI, and judging by the price increases there in a relatively short amount of time, only a few years, it's absolutely been worthwhile for me. And that increase in capital growth has more than made up for an extra few percentage points of yield or return. The other thing I would say as well is that ROI, everyone says, what's your ROI? And they go, oh, I get better than that, or I get worse than that. You've got to have a benchmark for the numbers you're working off. So, for example, if Rob was using his numbers and working off 2% and I was working off 4%, which I know Rob wouldn't, but I work off 4%, for example, then somebody coming to me who uses 2% because that's the best rate out there, whereas I use 4%, which is one of the worst rates out there for a buy-to-let, then they go, oh, I get higher ROIs than you. Well, actually, you don't. You're just massaging your numbers to make yourself feel good. So be careful with that as well. People tend to tweak numbers, especially if they're trying to find their own deal, because you have deal bias, to make the numbers look as best as possible. Right? If I get maximum rent, so they overshoot the rent, the best mortgage product, everything goes right for me, my solicitors do me a bit of a deal, then I'm going to get an ROI of 12%. Well, on paper, if all that happens, yes, you will. But realistically, your solicitor's not going to do you a deal. You might not get it let for the top money, and you might not get the best mortgage product for one reason or other. So you end up with a few percentage points less. So just a few things to be careful of. People's ROIs are different because they base them on different numbers and include different things. Every time I get somebody who says, oh, I get this ROI, I ask them to break down their numbers, and they're often a little bit more bullish on what they're going to do or the products they're going to get than I would be. So my ROI is currently 8%, but based on conservative expectations.
I think that is a really, really valuable point about the kind of costs that you take into account. Whether you're talking ROI or net yield, you're still making assumptions about costs in there because you don't know what your true costs are going to be. So Rob mentioned the mortgage, but what about allowance for voids? What about how much you budget for maintenance? What about whether you're self-managing or using an agent? All these factors will mean that your ROI could be vastly different from somebody else's who was trying to assess the same property. And that's why really you don't want to be comparing yourself to other people too much. You want to be having your own set of figures and benchmark against your own assumptions, your own set of expectations, rather than anyone else's. So I think that's a really important point. And you don't really know what return you're going to get from a property until you've owned it a few years and you've seen how these things have really shaken out. So great question. Thank you very much, Mike. It's allowed us to touch on some really important points, I think.
It certainly has. And you know what else is great? Our property summits. Probably the last time I'm going to mention it this year. Certainly for a long time anyway. And that's because we've nearly finished for the year. We've got one in Manchester in October, one in London. They may be sold out because we're recording this slightly in advance and a lot of places are already gone. But at the off chance that there's one or two places left, you might want to get involved and you might want to check out our website, thepropertyhub.net/summit. Or if you're out and about and you're on your phone, we make it super simple for you. Text the word summit, leave a space, pop in your email and send it to the number 88802 and we'll send you some info. So that's the word summit, a space, then your email, then 88802, and we'll let you know if there's any places left.
So go check out the summit if you're interested, but definitely check out the Property Podcast on Thursday because we will be back with another jam-packed half hour or so full of property goodness, news, resources, you name it. We will see you then. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ask Rob and Rob. Have fun. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.